All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Caring Counts Live. My name is Taylor Hewlett. I'm from Applewood, Our House. Our goal with these is to connect people in memory care because we believe the more connections you have, the more support you have, both with your challenges and your successes, because I think we need to celebrate those too. Caring Counts is brought to you by Applewood, Our House. Well, today I am super excited to have Evan Plys from the Psychiatry Department at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. Evan, thanks for being here and welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And also thanks for having these presentations. Like, this is such a cool opportunity and such a neat thing that you're doing for the community. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. We really enjoy it. Like I said, we really want to connect people in memory care and in the industry, for lack of a better word, as a whole. So I think it's awesome. So with that being said, I said you're from the Psychiatry Department at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, so I'm actually a geropsychologist in a psychiatry department. So I do research and also clinical work. So a lot of counseling and psychotherapy, specifically with older adults. And I'm really excited at UC Health. We actually have a new outpatient specialized geriatric psychiatry clinic. And so it's myself and my partner, who's a geriatric psychiatrist, and we're really committed to providing these specialty services for older adults and their families at UC Health. And so we're really excited to be launching that shortly.
That sounds so exciting. So my first question for you, when you start talking about geriatric psychology, my brain goes, what is that? I've never heard of that. And I'm wondering if someone in our audience or some people in our audience feel the same way. If you do, please feel free to comment in if you have any questions about this field. I would love to learn more. So what is it? Can you tell me a little bit more about it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we're clinical psychologists, and we have that framework of and practice of clinical psychology. But if you think about the lifespan, there's these major developmental milestones that happen, and they're unique at each phase of life. And so we get a lot of training in later life. So just like there are child psychologists who really spend a lot of time building expertise in, what are the physical changes and, cognitive and emotional changes that happen in adolescence. We get a lot of training on, what's normal aging. So physically, what are the normal changes? What are, the not normal changes? Cognitively, emotionally, and socially. I think one of the neat things about psychology is we do a lot of work on thinking about how people's roles change, not just in the family, but also within society, and what that means. And it really is a basis of understanding what are the normative events that happen in older adulthood and what is not normative, and how do we, on the psychological side of things, really assess and treat some of those non-normative life events.
So I love that when you talk about looking at how people age, and there's I think a lot to unpack there, especially around meeting people where they are. That seems to be a theme that I found in doing these Caring Counts Live, that in order to care for someone, and I'm going to bring in memory care and assisted living here with this, is meeting them where they are. So it sounds to me like that's a really exciting thing to do. But let's jump right into the memory care part of things. How does geriatric psychology translate into the dementias and caring for someone with dementia?
Yeah, so obviously dementia is would be categorized in that non-normative aging experience, and it's an illness that not all older adults get, obviously. So what we do in when we're treating psychological issues that occur in the context of somebody living with dementia or their family members. We really take all of those components and really try to build a complete picture of the individual and their environment, both socially and their physical environment. So we want to think of, what are the physical limitations, what are the other physical illnesses, cognitively, where are the person's strengths and weaknesses, psychologically, what are the relationships like, what are the person's individual values that they've built over this lifespan. So we're getting a really clear image from a lot of different sources, but then also getting a really clear history of the individual. And we see a lot of I think in memory care, we do a lot of work with staff around helping to support residents to and managing difficult behaviors. And we also do a lot of support for families in that setting around coping with changes, adjustments, grief, and also just putting together plans to really support a high quality of life, particularly later on in the advanced stages of dementia.
Yeah, I really like that. Something that popped into my head, one of our house managers said, was when you said bad behaviors. A bad behavior is the person with dementia showing the caregiver, showing us that we're not meeting one of their needs. What do you think about that? What comes to your mind when I say that?
Yeah, no, I think that's totally spot on. And I like the framing of that because it makes us evaluate ourselves and also the environment. So I think when it's a shift, right, in how we're caring, because when somebody isn't in that advanced stage of illness, we might go directly to them and say, okay, like what's going on here? Let's have a conversation about that. That actually can still work in some certain situations. And in thinking about particularly in the memory care unit where we see more severe dementia, we do want to think about, okay, what am I bringing to the situation? Is it something interpersonal? Is it something that as a community or as in this person's living space that we're not providing, and so we need to either change the environment, like something as simple as putting the blinds up or down, or something more complex of really doing some digging to see like food preferences or something like that. So I like that framework because it really is a lot of problem solving. And if you don't have a clear picture of who the person is and all of those other factors, then it's really challenging to do that. And so I think that's one of the nice things about this work is that you really do, like, your livelihood as a caregiver, whether it's professional or as a family member, your livelihood relies on really understanding the individual, and that's pretty great to be able to build those types of relationships.
Yeah, it sounds like it's almost crucial to build that relationship. And so having that one-on-one time, that one-on-one care is super important to meet that person where they are.
Definitely, yeah.
So I have a question, and it could be kind of a silly question here, but in your field of geriatric psychology, do you primarily work, and we'll throw the umbrella of memory care over this whole kind of thing, because that's kind of what we're talking about today. Do you primarily work with the caregiver themselves or the person with the dementia, or is it both?
So one of the nice things that we actually work with, all of the systems in a memory care community. So we do work with residents and doing things like planning pleasant activities, engaging people, whether it be with arts and music or in helping construct an environment or behavioral plan with that resident. We also do a lot of work with staff around training, problem solving, and also support. That it's a challenging setting to work in, and I think especially obviously during COVID, you add a major trauma in the form of a pandemic that increases stress. So we're providing support there, and then also the family members and thinking about not just one singular family caregiver, but the whole family system. We can be involved in that care as well, and so we're pretty multi-dimensional in that sense.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think if you're in our audience and you're watching this right now and you want to get a hold of Evan or you want to learn more about geriatric psychology, I think that's something that you could do and talk about individualized. I mean, it's all going to be different for everyone, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, like I said, it's not just about understanding what's going on in an individual's world that you can see, but particularly when we're thinking about older adulthood, there's so much history of the individual, of the family, that if you don't understand that, then you're really only getting a small component of the picture to really understand how to do something like increase pleasant activities, or to manage stress or depression. The family, the history of individuals really do influence that stuff. So it's very individualized.
So let's jump into, I think there's two topics I would really like to focus on of the many that we could, but today you talked about activities and specifically during a pandemic and what that looks like, staying safe, right? Because we've seen that one of the more vulnerable populations is the older adult during this pandemic. So staying safe, but still doing activities that can engage a person with dementia. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think it's, you're kind of bringing up even a broader question around like safety and autonomy. That is like a conversation with every family member, caregiver that I work with. We always have that conversation about, thinking of this safety autonomy spectrum. Where do you fall and where do you kind of default to? And I think that, during a pandemic, that's really important to know, because there are very, maybe even more than in other times, very clear consequences of, where you kind of fall in that continuum. But it also does affect activity planning around how much support are you going to provide, how much structure are you going to provide, and how much autonomy are you going to provide in these types of activities. I think right now, as people are kind of thinking about where they fall on that balance, since we're still very much in this pandemic, I think that I wouldn't really fault anyone for leaning more on the safety side of things. But as far as how to engage individuals, particularly people living with dementia, I've done a lot of work on my research, on the research side of things around activities. And one of the theories that I read that I really come back to a lot is this concept of flow. And it's a positive psychology theory, and it's there are actually some books on it that are really accessible and not super academic-y. Like I would read it in my leisure time. It moves away from just thinking about the individual, but also really evaluating the types of activities individuals are engaging in. So really thinking about the intersection of, there are these tasks and these activities that exist, and there are these people that exist, and we want to match them in the best way possible. Some of the things that theory really lays out in picking tasks and activities that really provide this sense of fulfillment is embedded in the task. There has to be some sort of challenge or engaging component of it. And I think with certain types of neurocognitive disorders, there are attentional limitations. But really picking something that is going to provide a little bit of challenge, but enough support that somebody can actively engage fully in the task, but it's not so easy that they're going to lose interest. And then also something that's providing feedback to them. So I think of like trivia as being an example. It's something that you can maybe answer questions. Like that's something that's pretty available to most people, and it's challenging. And you're going to see that you're going to get some right, you're going to get some wrong, but you get that feedback, whether it's positive or negative. You know when you answer something correct, you know when you answer something wrong, and it's also challenging you. So I think that's a really great activity. So that's on the activity side of things. But the other component is the individual. And I think that that's actually one of the things that we probably don't do as good a job sometimes in thinking about beyond just reducing boredom, beyond just increasing entertainment or something like that. Really what are the individual's goals and values, and how can we use these activities that are engaging to promote those goals? So I think one of my critiques, and I say this with a caveat of there are a lot of communities that do activity programming really, really well. And one of my critiques of communities that I've worked with that maybe don't do activity programming as well is the framework of activity programs or engaging individuals living with dementia and activities as a way to reduce boredom, to then reduce symptoms, agitated behaviors or something like that. When really activities are there, that's a nice component of activities, but they're there to promote growth, and they're there to add something. And I think a lot of times we're losing what the activities can add. And so asking people what are their goals, what are their values, what are the things that they want to accomplish at any stage of life, at any stage of illness, and then really reframing the types of activities that we're choosing to help that person actualize those goals or that growth. And I think that that's something that even during a pandemic is when we have those two things in mind, we can kind of problem solve around what's available and realistic and safe to do, and how can we frame this as a way of we're not just doing this to do it, we're actually still engaging with life in a meaningful way.
I think there's a lot to unpack there too. We have a question that popped in that I'll pop up on the screen here in just a few minutes from Malu. But before I do that, what you said about meeting someone where they are, the individualized activity to help them grow, and especially during a time with COVID where we do have to do our best to be physically distant, still socially connected, but physically distant. I think it can get very challenging, but also what a cool opportunity to be creative with the types of engagement and activities you do. So that'll lead me right into the question that Malu posed, and that is, do you have any specific activities that can be super successful, especially during COVID, for people living with dementia?
Yeah, one of the things that I think is really cool, and I think they're still doing it, but there was initiative where a lot of museums actually had live streaming like tours that you could for free just log on and take a tour of a museum. And I thought that was really cool because it actually opened up opportunities where even before COVID you may not be able to make it to X museum to see X exhibit, but there have been a lot of really creative free platforms online like that. The other resource is, I think it's Matherway in Chicago, who is an aging organization. They put out weekly activities and links for dyads to do together. I think a lot of it was based off like trivia and stuff like that. But I'm also someone who really enjoys traveling and seeing new things, and have been missing that so much during COVID, and there's just been a lot of creative options online that not only the act of watching, of doing a virtual museum tour, but also these are prompts to then have conversations that are meaningful as well. And I think that, to answer the question of, what's been really successful, something that's enjoyable and then can lead to a conversation that maybe moves from the typical conversation of how awful the world is right now. So
I really like that, and I think what I'd really like to just shine a little light on is the growth piece. Not only are you taking, for example, a virtual tour of your museum, and maybe that tour lasts all of 2 or 3 minutes for someone with dementia, depending on where they are within that spectrum. But then the conversation that might lead to with them could be a form of growth that's individualized for that person.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think one of the things that is also nice is we never full, like, there's never something that we can't learn from another individual, and so not only meaningful conversations about life and self growth, but it can also, particularly in more that moderate stage of dementia, can be a nice prompt for reminiscence of, oh, like, how nice was that? Why don't you tell me about a time that you went to a museum, or did you know anyone who did this? And you can still learn new things from these types of activities, and that extends the engagement. We obviously know that reminiscence is a really great tool, particularly in that middle stage of the dementia process.
Thank you so much, Malou, for that question. If you do have another question specifically for Evan around activities or anything that we've talked about, geriatric psychology and all of these fun things, these fun topics, please feel free to post them in the comments here. The other point that we talked about a little bit before this was and I'm not going to say the language right, but just I want to jump into like supporting the caregivers, so whether that be you're in a professional caregiver in a facility, in a community, in a home, or you're a family caregiver and you're caring for your loved one and you know them super, super well. With the pandemic, the umbrella of COVID, there can be lots of stress on these people that are caring for their loved one or caring for residents. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things you've learned and some of the, I guess, strategies of ways they can cope during this time?
Yeah, this is a really important point, and since COVID, I've been really focusing a lot on thinking about some of the stressors that family members are facing in communities, and in residential care communities particularly, and I think from my perspective, where that's kind of coming from is we have seen the images of assisted livings and nursing homes in the news as really being ground zero for this pandemic. And there's been a big response of, the residents and the staff, the frontline workers are experiencing this trauma. And I say that not to say that everyone's going to have PTSD, but not everyone who experiences trauma gets PTSD. It's a very high stress, prolonged situation that is really affecting the residents and the staff, and I've seen a lot of activity and thought and articles for those populations. And for people who have been in assisted livings, they know that this community really runs through the residents, or includes the residents, the staff, and the family members of those residents. And that is really, with some other community members as well, that's really how you would define an assisted living community, for example. And I was, I guess, surprised at how little attention the distress of family members was receiving in the conversations around the significant impact to assisted livings during COVID. And it seemed like, here's this big part of the community, a community that is experiencing a trauma, a really highly significant stressful event, and this section is not receiving as much attention in the mainstream media, at least. And so in thinking about what are some of the stressors that are associated with being a family member of a loved one in a community during COVID, I think that there's a lot of practical challenges and also emotional challenges. And so the practical challenges are seeking information and staying connected to the community. I think one of the things as we prepare for a potential second wave and potentially moving, hopefully this doesn't happen, but if we move back towards restrictions, what are the roles of family members in the community when, visiting isn't an option? And I think that families play such a vital role that we had clearly defined before this, and then we have these safety guidelines, and we're public health officials are definitely going to lean on that autonomy support spectrum to the side of safety, as they should. But what are we doing? Like, how are we defining roles for families? And we can't just leave this vital component of a community out of a community. We need to shift how we think about those roles. And so that's a very individualized thing that really has to happen based on the individual, the community needs, and feasibility there. Also staying connected to the community. If you think about, albeit an extreme example, the one that I see a lot is drawing comparisons to 9/11. And if you think about in New York City, being a resident of New York City during 9/11, you don't have to be at ground zero. You don't have to be a firefighter or police officer to have that have impacted your life. This is your community. And so how, I think family members are feeling that to a certain extent. And so how are they staying connected to the community? How are they receiving information? How are they supporting and contributing to the growth and the changes that are going to happen to communities? And what's the level of involvement there? So those are kind of the practical things. I think the other side are just the challenging emotions that we're seeing around fear and anxiety. Obviously, who's not anxious now, and grief and loss. You're grieving. You're anxious about what the future holds, but then you're also grieving that you had this routine, you had this relationship that's been disrupted and has changed in some way. And then the research that I've been doing is I've been going on a lot of Facebook groups and reading comments from family members. And I see a theme of guilt and shame that is really coming up during COVID around, was placement, is my family member safe? And did I do something wrong? And I think when, you have the family member as kind of the liaison between this community of assisted living and this community of care that's separate from the assisted living who's invested in the resident, they kind of get it from both sides. And so I can see where those feelings of guilt and heightened anxiety and stress might surface even more on top of the grief. So there's just a lot going on for family members right now. And I think that we really need to think about how we're addressing that and how we're really involving them in any type of healing process as a community and rebuild.
This has been an opportunity for us to redefine that family role in the care team and really bring them in closer and closer to those things. When the restrictions were there, not physically, but definitely emotionally and socially, for sure. And Malu just made another comment too. We had some suggestions come in from family members to actually include the names of other residents, their friends, in the photos that we send out, so that when they do call or when they do an outside visit right now, because that's what we're doing, or a FaceTime visit, whatever that might look like, they actually have a point of conversation to talk about, oh, tell me about your friend. What did you do today? Did you enjoy your coffee today together? And things like that. So I think just finding ways to redefine that role and still have them be part of the care is super important.
I love that, and I think especially in memory care, it's hard to, like, we don't even think about how much we use the environment to engage our loved ones during visits. Saying, oh, I saw the activities director on my way in and they said this, or to pick something up in their room and say, oh, like, this is new,
yes.
like, tell me about this.
Yes.
And when you're on telephone, it's you don't have those cues, and it actually takes a lot more effort on the family member to engage someone, particularly someone living with more advanced stages of dementia. And like, I think it's great that you're providing those prompts and guidance for that, because that's another thing that is practically lost in this shift to virtual visits.
Yeah, I thank you for saying that too. I think, yeah, it's like I said, it's an opportunity. Obviously, it's an opportunity none of us saw coming, but here we are, and we all have to do our very, very best to provide the best care we can for our residents.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You talked about the practical and emotional stressors of COVID as kind of shine a light on for our family members and our communities. What are some things that they can do to, now I might say the wrong language here, but deal with those or work through those stressors?
Yeah, and so I think that on the practical side of things, it really takes a lot of problem solving, and thinking about what have I tried, what works, what doesn't, what are all the possible solutions to help me navigate this extra barrier in this relationship. I think on the emotional side of things, it's actually a little bit more challenging, because you think about the emotions that I mentioned: anxiety, grief, guilt. Those are all really natural, and I think it would be kind of odd to not feel them during this, and especially going through a major transition and change, and going through that change and not having a ton of information. I think that is obviously going to bring up those negative emotions, and I think what's challenging is some of the advice I have is around acceptance. We don't want to change. Like, I don't think we're going to be able to change those feelings. And I think sometimes when we try to change negative emotions or not experience negative emotions, we can do more harm than good. And so, I think that it starts with really recognizing what's going on and what you're feeling. One of the things that I think has been helpful is, particularly around grief, is naming what you're feeling as grief. And a step further is there's this term called disenfranchised grief, which I think people are feeling right now. And disenfranchised grief is essentially you're feeling the loss, you're feeling this grieving process, but it's tied to something that maybe society doesn't traditionally recognize as a grievable event. And so, during this pandemic, we've seen images like over and over of, you know, family members who have lost a loved one, who never got to say goodbye, you know, who staff who have, you know, lost like like numbers and numbers of friends in like a day. And those are the people we interview like on the news, and those are the stories that we get. And it's almost a way of society saying like, that's what you should grieve. Like those are the feelings that like you're allowed to have during COVID. Um, and someone who, you know, is struggling about, you know, how do I transition to, you know, phone visits? They're not going well. I'm not sure what to do. I'm really busy. I'm not visiting as much. I don't know what to tell my brother who lives 3 states over. And I'm really sad about that. And that's really challenging. That's really not like the appropriate like society when like those people aren't on the news as much.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, really naming it and saying like it's okay to, you know, to have this response, and other people are having this response. You know, grief isn't like, we can't really control when we grieve. And, you know, all of those things I mentioned are losses. One of the things that I mentioned in something I wrote for UC Health was just the time before and after a visit. When I'm driving to an assisted living to visit my family member, there's this kind of buffer period of you know, me driving there, maybe thinking about what I'm going to say, you know, leaving work stress behind, going to visit a loved one. And then when I leave, there might be 10, 15 minutes of processing how challenging that was and how difficult that was, and maybe even crying before I go home to my family. That's lost. And it's okay to grieve that. Or, you know, if there's a way to implement that, that's fine. But like those little things of, you know, having that time to drive, you know, not having to repeat yourself on the phone because you have a bad connection, like you can feel sad about those. Like those, it's perfectly appropriate to grieve those things, even if, you know, society is saying that, you know, the face of grief is the person who lost their loved one who like they weren't able to say goodbye to. That's kind of the benchmark that we've set. But that shouldn't discount all of the other losses and griefs that people are experiencing. And so kind of leaning into that and saying, you know, I'm feeling this way. I know why I'm feeling this way. It's okay that I feel this way. That doesn't negate other people's experiences. And, you know, then just practicing good self-care around social support, staying healthy, sleep, exercise, engaging in enjoyable activities would be my best guess of a recommendation.
Right, right. And the recommendation past identifying what you're feeling as the emotion, whether it be grief, sadness, what have you, and then really just naming it is kind of is what I'm hearing you say is kind of my first step. And then after that, having that time to process that while engaging in good self-care, the things that I know are going to help me.
Exactly. Yeah. And naming it is so important, and a multi-step process of, you know, not just saying like, oh yeah, I'm feeling sadness and grief. It's like when I feel sadness and grief, you know, what happens physically? Do I tense up? You know, what thoughts run through my mind? Do I go back to a certain memory, or, you know, a certain thing about myself? I feel guilty because I think I'm a bad son or something like that. And just notice, you know, when you feel these things, where does your mind go? What happens to your body? And, you know, like I said, it's okay to feel these things now. You know, the thing to monitor is how you respond to those feelings. So when I'm feeling guilty, do I, you know, go to a liquor store and drink a, you know, pack of, you know, beer and get drunk? Or do I, you know, pick up the phone and leave an angry voicemail for somebody because I'm trying to get rid of this guilt feeling. Those are the things to monitor, and try to seek help around, if it's getting to that point. And really, the more that we approach our emotions with curiosity and really try to understand what's going on and why, and how it's manifesting in ourselves, a lot of times that can be enough there to make it bearable. But as far as the goal is always to not feel negative emotions, and I think that is going to be very challenging during this time.
To bring it full circle all the way back up to geriatric psychology, I think the clinic that you are launching soon sounds like such a great resource for people that are feeling this way, that can identify that this is what I'm feeling, and yeah, I do need some extra help. I do need some extra support. I mean, that's why we're doing these caring counts too, to really connect people, especially during this time of COVID.
Absolutely, yeah, and we fully expect that a lot of when we're up hopefully in a couple of weeks, that we're going to be seeing a lot of the effects of physical distancing, both in older adults who might feel more isolated, or in family members who are feeling isolated, and also feeling like without a guide, without a map. I think that we, particularly for the care partners, this event has really, in my mind, made it clear that enough has been disrupted that maybe we need to go back and redraw the map, and redefine what those roles are, and redefine what are the positives, what are the negatives, what are my coping strategies. Because it's not pathological. It's not that people are like depressed or can't cope or not resilient. It's that we've been thrown a very challenging curveball, and we need to really take the time to reset and connect with what was working before, because I think a lot of people, at least what we're seeing, is a lot of people are going back to the things that have worked before, and in certain situations it's not working now, and so we need to just tweak a few things.
Coming from a place of curiosity, right there. I love that.
Yeah,
that's great. Evan, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of our Caring Counts Live. I so appreciate your time and your insight. I wanted to ask you, I don't know if you have a website up yet, or how people can learn more about the clinic you're launching.
Yeah, so we are still, very much in the developmental process. So what I would love is when we do get everything up and running. Like I said, we're really trying to meet the needs soon. And especially we want to be up and running before the holidays, because I think that's going to be a time where our services can be really helpful. So as soon as that happens, I would love to send you that information, and see if we can share that. But it's going to be through UC Health and the Department of Psychiatry. That department also has a website of resources for coping during COVID, which if you haven't been to, I would recommend. It's vetted by our team there. I would love to share more information on our clinic when we get that up and running soon.
That is so exciting, so exciting. So what we'll do is we can share some of these resources in our comments section here on our Facebook Live episode. And then when your clinic is up and ready and you're ready to start kind of giving out that resource, we'll start doing that as well. Because like I said, our goal is to connect people in this field and in memory care. So with that, Evan, thank you so much for being here. We so appreciate it. I also wanted to let everyone know we have our annual Caring Counts event coming in October. This year's event will be all online, and it's all complimentary, Monday through Friday in October at 12 p.m. The dates for that Monday through Friday are each day at 12 p.m., October 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th. Our Caring Counts Alzheimer's and Dementia Conference, you can register for that conference via our Facebook event or online. I can also post the link here in the comments. Evan, thank you again.
Thank you so much again for having me. And this is such an awesome resource, and I'm really just honored to be part of it.
Well, we're glad you're here too. We're so excited to share what you're doing with our network and share these resources out. Everyone, we'll see you in 2 Wednesdays. Thank you for being here with us, and we'll see you later.